Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Pop That Mama podcast. In this episode, we have Bonnie Walker, who is a mother of 5. How amazing is that? And she's been a doula for over 23 years. So it's safe to say that she knows a lot about birth and babies, and I can't wait to pick her brain. So this episode, we're going to be understanding what has changed in the birth landscape over 23 years from her perspective, and why that might be relevant to us as pregnant women. As always, get yourself comfortable, grab a cup of tea, and enjoy. Bonnie, welcome to the podcast. So lovely to see you.
Thank you so much, Poppy, for having me. I'm really excited to be here as well.
So why don't we kick off by hearing a bit about what inspired you to become a doula?
Okay, big question, and it involves quite a story that actually has to go all the way back to my own birth, because that's where it all started for me. My parents got pregnant with me in the mid-70s in Tasmania. That's the small little island off the bottom of Australia. And my parents were hippies living in a community of hippies in a small rural town in Tasmania. And when my parents went to the hospital to talk about my birth and, get ready for me to arrive, my dad was told that he wouldn't be present in the birth space. That was not going to happen. That was obviously, not ideal and not acceptable for them. So my dad said, let's hire a private midwife and let's give birth at home. Obviously that had been done for generations, but we'd moved more to a medical model by the 70s. And so home birth was still seen as a risky thing. But Mum and Dad hired a beautiful home birth midwife, and my grandmother, who also lived in the hippie community alongside my parents and a whole bunch of other families, my grandmother had already given birth 5 times, and she was a traditional midwife and had supported a lot of birth. So my grandmother, my mother, my father, and the midwife were all present for my birth. I was born in a tiny little hut that my dad had built out of timber that he dragged out of the forest with a draft horse, actually, and into candlelight. Every account that my mum and dad ever told me of my birth was that it was a beautiful experience, that it was incredibly transformative for them as a young couple to witness birth. And that's the story that I always knew. That's what I grew up knowing, that birth was a normal, natural, physiological event that women are capable of. Women have been birthing for generations. And so my whole childhood, that's the narrative that I heard. My grandmother was at births all the time, supporting women and families, and positively spoke about birth. And my mum herself was at births also, so it kind of just passed along the generations. And when I was 24 and had given birth to my first daughter, I was invited by a really good friend to be a birth support at her birth. And because of the modelling of my grandma and my mum, I just assumed that women support women in birth. It was a community service. I just saw it as something that we do. For me, it wasn't a profession. And so when my really good friend invited me to be a birth support, I was so excited to be that. And she gave me a call when she was in labour, and I went to her home, and she also had a home birth midwife. This was in early 2000s. And I was there just minutes after the baby had been born. She birthed very quickly, and by the time she rang me, it took me an hour to get there, and the baby was already born. And I just felt so incredibly honoured to share in the most personal moments of their relationship, apart from obviously the creating of that baby. The next most intimate thing that can possibly happen is being there when a couple welcomes a baby into the world. And to see that mum with this fresh baby on her chest and the look on her face when I walked in the door of just absolute sheer delight that she'd given birth, it was incredible and infectious. Like that's what drives me to still be a doula after all these years. So I've always seen birth as something that women supporting women is so important. It wasn't until we actually left Tasmania. I supported a lot of birth in Tasmania. And then in 2013, there was a big bushfire that went through our town. And that's quite a common thing. Unfortunately, in Australia, bushfires can be very devastating. Our town was destroyed. We experienced a life-altering change. We had 5 children at that point. So we put 5 children into a caravan and we lived in that caravan for a year while we were deciding what to do. And then we decided to travel Australia. So we spent 2.5 years in the caravan traveling. And we found ourselves in Western Australia, which, for those that know, we are almost as far away from our home, land of origin as we could be. We are on the other side of the country. And it wasn't until we got to Perth that I started supporting birth here, because birth's just part of what I do. I guess this is why we're doulas, because we are so birth driven. We love birth. And everywhere I am, every pregnant woman I see, every relationship I formed, in Tasmania, but also on the road traveling, I would just start chatting to women about pregnancy and motherhood and birth. And I was fortunate to be invited in, to those personal moments. And for me, like I said, it wasn't a career. It was alongside my career. It was just something I did on the side until we got to Perth, and I again met a group of women and got invited into birth. And then one day, one lady said to me, "What do you charge?" And I said, "Oh, I don't. I've never charged." And she said, "Seriously, you know that you could charge?" And I was like, "What?" I didn't even know that this was a profession. I didn't even know that was what we called ourselves. I didn't really know the term doula growing up. I didn't know that term. It was a birth support. My grandmother was, a birth support, and mum also. And so that's when, it was 9 years ago actually, that I became a professional birth doula, and that became something that I now do full time. But before that, It was, it was community support, women supporting.
Honestly, I know exactly what you mean, because there's a lovely lady who lives opposite me who's giving birth very soon. And she said to me, can you come to my house and just talk to me? I've got a few decisions I need to make. Anyway, we had a lovely connection at her house. And I just said, look, if you want me to be there, I will. And in my head, I wasn't thinking I'm going to charge her, because it's the most miraculous, incredible thing to bear witness to, that I know exactly what you mean, that it almost feels weird, like charging, because I want to be there in birth. But then, of course, there's long hours and all of that. And obviously we need to make a living. But I completely understand where you're coming from when you say that. So, wow, there is so much I want to ask you, and so many places where we can go. But I really want to try and understand, in your perspective, over this whole period of supporting births, and presumably you've supported home births, hospitals, all different types of birth scenarios, what are the kind of key themes or key changes that you've seen over this time that you feel is going to be relevant to the pregnant listeners? And, feel free to take us anywhere with this. I'm personally really interested to know too.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I have supported birth in all forms, cesarean birth, home birth, hospital birth. It's definitely changed. There's been a shift, and I think that's reflected in current numbers. I'm not sure what the numbers are in the UK, but in Australia, we recently had the Mother and Baby report, and the numbers reflect what I witness when I'm supporting birth. I actually mostly support hospital birth now here in Perth. Mostly because that's where the women need support. Obviously birth hasn't changed. Physiologically, biologically, birth hasn't changed since the beginning of time, but the way women birth has changed. The system they're birthing within has changed. And so the medicalisation of birth is the number one thing that I've seen changes in over, this period of time. And it might just be the circles that I was mixing in back in Tasmania. It might have, I can't speak broadly for other circles, but I only knew 2 women who had caesareans back in the early 2000s. And those caesareans were medical emergencies and they were necessary and needed. But now here in Australia, first-time mums, the caesarean rates are just over 40% in Australia. It's dramatically different from what things were when I was giving birth and when women around me were giving birth. So I think the caesarean rate back then was somewhere in the mid-20%, but it's definitely shifted. So that's the biggest thing I've noticed is the medicalisation of birth. What I'm seeing now in the hospital system is, very high induction rates, especially for first-time mums. And that's a real concern for a lot of mums because they're not sure necessarily whether that's the way they want to go, but that's what's being presented to them as the best option. We're living in an era where there's so much information, almost information overload. But I think a lot of women are lacking traditional wisdom, and that's something that we could do better with.
Yeah. I mean, it's not any better here in the UK. I think in 2023, it was 43% caesarean rate. And now I know that the induction rate is around 33%, but in some hospitals, a lot higher. So what do you think? I mean, it's a big conversation, but what's going on?
I think this is from my perspective with what I've seen of birth over all of these years. I think that we are not listening to our instincts in the same way that we used to listen to instinct. Instinct used to be that primal thing that, we're women. We know our bodies and we have the ability to tune in and listen to our intuition and our instinct. And I think a lot of that, unfortunately, is being moulded by the medical system, and women are trusting somebody else's advice and opinion and seeing doctors and midwives as the authority rather than them being the authority of their own body and their own birth.
Yeah, and I think it starts in early pregnancy when you go to all of these meetings and these tests. And of course, some of these things are really important and we're not saying they aren't. They save lives. We can find things out. But, putting all of the women through the system, that kind of constant checking things, for me, I know for both of my pregnancies, it kind of made me feel really on edge about what could possibly happen. And so it kind of primes you to be in this submissive role of receiving information about your body, and then you actually forget to plug back in and ask yourself. So I think it's, medicine has its place, but so does intuition. And I don't know about you, but as a doula, I found, especially towards the end before I fell pregnant with Olivia, I slowed things down. But I really felt in the hospitals that people, including myself, we would be looking at the machines for the data. How many contractions? What's the heart rate doing? The birth partner looking at the machine, me looking at the machine, midwife looking at the machine, woman looking at the machine. And we forget that the woman has a lot of data inside her. How is she feeling? I think certainly from my perspective, I've seen the same. And there is a lot of fear as well in the hospital system. Of course, hospitals want babies and mothers and families to be well, but they also do not want to be sued and they don't want to be liable for things going wrong. So then they start to do too much too soon, because obviously in court you can trace your steps back and explain why you did something, but it's very hard to say why you didn't. And also intuition would never stand up in court. And a midwife could never just say, I just knew, I felt it. No.
So right.
Yeah.
You're so right. Yeah. And honestly, as I said, I'm in hospitals a lot more now than I perhaps used to be. I used to be more at home births, but now, roughly 3-4 births a month. Majority of those are in a hospital system. And I'm exactly like you. When that beeping, when that screen, even as doulas, we learn to read what's going on based on the screen. That's changed a lot for me. That wasn't the way it was when I first started as a doula. And I even get sucked into what's happening on the screen. You know, why am I not looking at my client's face? What's she feeling? Why am I not asking?
Absolutely. And I've often thought if I was a midwife in the system, I would probably be doing all of the things that they're doing. You know, I really don't like placing blame. It's just this kind of situation we find ourselves in, and it's just moving, you know, and the intervention rates are increasing, but it's really hard to sort of pinpoint a why or a what is going on. It's just happening. It's the current landscape.
Yes, and I think you're right. There is a fear-based culture. When I was supporting birth at the very beginning, I think the number one thing women feared was the pain of birth. And so we talked a lot about the pain of birth. And, you know, obviously we know as doulas there are so many strategies we can use to work with the pain and to reframe the pain and to manage pain. Like, there are so many natural ways that we can do that. But women aren't just fearful of pain anymore. They're fearful of the medical system, and how to navigate the medical system has become its own thing. You know, there's so much time that I spend with clients now is less on, you know, birth itself and the instinct of birthing, although that's obviously what I would love to spend more time on, but we really do spend so much time on birth mapping, and if this, then this, and if that, then this, because not only do they have to navigate what's going on inside their body and, you know, manage their own mindset, but they're also needing to navigate the system. And, you know, in Australia, 98.5% of women give birth in a hospital system or a birth centre. And so the majority of women are giving birth inside a system. So we actually need to work out, well, how do you birth inside the system then if, you know, if the majority of women are? And as we know, you know, hormones are disrupted when we leave our home, when we leave our safe place where all the smells are familiar and the environment's familiar. And the very first intervention is hopping in the car and heading to the hospital. And that does change hormones. So how can we work with that? And that's what I spend a lot of time with clients doing now, is talking through, well, what do you do when you hop in the car? And, you know, we have lots of things as doulas, as you know. We've got our little tricks up our sleeve of how do we manage the transitions between leaving your home environment, driving through traffic, finding a car park, and then making your way to the birth suite, which is, you know, for a lot of our hospitals, it's up lifts or, you know, stairs, and it's through a very busy public hospital often. And that is challenging for women. So we do talk a lot in our time leading up to birth about, you know, it's not just navigating the contractions anymore. We're navigating a much bigger thing.
Gosh, and it's just, imagine the sheer amount of women who will not have you and will not prepare, and who will think, well, you know, I'll go into hospital and birth will happen, and not realizing that they're going into this huge complex system that will affect them because it's not neutral. It's not a neutral space. Well, I want to know, I want to hear more about these conversations you're having, because obviously you are a skilled doula and I bet you do support women to have positive births. What are you saying to the women, and what kind of conversations do you have? And talk to us about how you support them in the moment as well, because if there's any birth partners listening, they might be able to get some nuggets from you.
Great question, and great point to bring up birth partners, because as we know, birth partners are crucial to the birth process, and the safety of the birthing mum is often fairly reliant on the relationship she has with her birth partner. And I know that birth partners make a difference, as you would too. You know, that's something that has changed over the last 20 odd years that I've been in the birth space. Men are becoming a lot more present. There's a lot more education for them, and you know, birth partners are so important. We know how important they are. So I actually work a lot with couples, and not just with the birthing woman, but with her birth partner, because that sense of safety that they can create together, usually at home in the lead up, or if not, you know, so obviously some of my clients start their labour in a hospital if they're being induced, or if they're a high risk pregnancy, then they're starting their labour in the hospital. So, you know, there are lots of things that birth partners can do to support. The preparation that I do with couples in the lead up to birth is really important. We talk through all the scenarios, you know, and I don't want this to feel overwhelming for anyone listening, because when I say we're going to talk through all the scenarios, everyone's like, what do you mean all the scenarios? Like, we can't even possibly predict like all the scenarios, right? But we talk about all the common ones, like what's going to happen if, your waters break first. Like, let's have that conversation. Let's talk about, what your options are, because for 15% of women, waters will break first. That'll be the first sign of labour. And for, 85% of women, the first sign of labour will be labour contractions. But, let's talk about those two, that fork in the road. What happens if your waters break? What happens if the first thing is you feel contractions? And what are you going to do when either of those scenarios present? So we talk through that. Early labour, that's really crucial. That early labour time, in my opinion, is probably one of the most crucial parts of labour, because that's where we are building those beautiful hormones. And if we're in a safe environment and we're feeling emotionally safe and physically safe and spiritually safe, that's what allows that oxytocin to build. And that's where birth partners can be so incredibly helpful in just protecting that space. We often talk as doulas about the oxytocin garters, that protection. And we talk to birth partners about, shutting the door and turning the lights off and closing blinds and just creating that little safe space for women to go into labour and feel safe within their bodies and allow those beautiful hormones to build, because that's what drives good, strong contractions. Just the knowledge that, good, strong contractions is what we're looking for, and that we're not to be scared of good, strong contractions. That's what brings the baby out. That's what we want. As doulas, we all talk to our women and the birth partners is to not be scared of the fact that labour is going to build on itself. Each contraction, ideally in a labour that's going well, is that each contraction is stronger than the last, and that we're moving towards the birth of the baby. And this is a positive thing. When I see my clients in long, strong, close together contractions, I'm smiling, and I say that to them. I'll be smiling, not because I'm enjoying watching you feel, the intensity of labour, but because I know that this is what brings babies out. This is what we're wanting. This is what we're planning for. Yeah. So just reminding women that this is what your body's created to do. This is what it's built to do. This is what it knows what to do. And that it's, when we support the physiology of birth, the body can be in autopilot like it is now growing a baby. I'm working with pregnant women and I say, right now your body is on autopilot. You're not thinking about, I need to grow the liver now, and now, oh my goodness, I'm late, I didn't grow eyelashes. We're not thinking that. We are allowing our body to go through the process of the development of the baby. And then, I think that we doubt ourselves as we get close to birth. We start thinking, well, what if my body doesn't go into labour? What if, things don't happen the way I want? What if I can't handle the pain? What if I lose control? We start to think of all those what ifs, and we start to doubt our own body's ability to go into labour at the right time for our body. I think we all know deep down that our body knows what it's doing, but it's just that reminder, coming back to that basic truth, that wisdom of your body knows what to do. And it's not just a flippant comment. I think sometimes we can just say, oh, your body will know what to do. So I think deep into that is where I go with women, like really reminding them that their body knows what it's doing.
I love that. I feel like our philosophy to birth is the same. Like what you're saying could be coming out of my mouth and with my clients. That I'm literally just nodding along. I'm like, yes, yes, yes. You would have felt this before, but obviously with you're designed for it. Your body knows what to do. For some women, it doesn't know what to do. It's the minority though. So I think it's a really healthy thing to say confidently, because we mustn't forget that. And a lot of the time, the statistics look terrible and look like childbirth is really not safe, but we're not realizing that often it's the first intervention that causes the chain reaction and kickstarts the cascade of interventions. And so often we'll hear that, women say, well, I'm so pleased I was in hospital, not realizing that actually it was the very first intervention that caused the whole cascade and that ended in potentially a C-section or whatever happened, that made her feel like the doctors saved her, but actually would that have even happened? There is so much nuance to this conversation. That's why I like having long form chats, because I don't think you can do this on social media. It's just that thing of balancing these two conversations of empowering and understanding we are capable, we're built for this, but also sometimes we need the medicine, we need the help, is a difficult thing, really, I think, to hold both truths.
Absolutely. And you're so right in saying what you say, because, you know, as mothers, we have a tendency to compare, and there's a lot of guilt that we feel as mothers, you know, because that's, you know, I don't even know where that comes from, to be honest, but I know that I've felt intense guilt as a mother, you know, the decisions that I've made about things and the comparison to other people. But I really think it's important that we know there is no right way to give birth. Most of the time birth works. Most of the time the body knows what it's doing. But there are those times, like in the same way that our bowels know what they're doing. We don't have to monitor it, and it knows how to eliminate. But there are some times some people have digestive issues, some, you know, and their bowels don't work. And so then they seek medical attention, and that's really important. But for the majority of people, our digestive system works, and all of our other systems in our body, our circulatory system or our respiratory system, like, we are designed with systems that work, but in some cases those systems don't. And it's not that that person's body has failed them, that their circulatory system isn't working. They go and get medical help and they get support. And I don't think there's any shame in that. I think that we need to definitely get that message across, that there is no right way to birth. And you know, it's really hard for women when they think, you know, when they hear that message, which is why it's so important for us to talk about this, because, you know, if we just say, trust your body knows what to do, and then that minority of women feel like, well, my body didn't know what it was doing.
Absolutely. And two, you know, those two truths can exist at once. It's okay. But I have done a lot of research into the history of childbirth, because I truly believe that it's really hard to understand why we are where we are without looking backwards and having context to the whole, you know, situation. And I delved deeper into the technocratic model of childbirth, which I know you'll know a lot about, versus the humanistic model, which, if you don't already know, listeners, the technocratic model of birth essentially sees women's bodies like machines that either kind of parts work or don't work and must be measured and controlled. Whereas the humanistic model is exactly what we're talking about, that actually the process works. It's a physiological process that can't be optimized further. So it works, but sometimes in the minority of cases, it doesn't work. But it feels like the hospital system is still very much, you know, based on the technocratic model. We see that in the way that, you know, vaginal assessments every 4 hours must be measured. Whereas as doulas, we would say, well, we can instinctively pick up on what's happening, listen to the labor sounds, you know, look out for those other signs. So that's really interesting, I think, because once you understand the model the system is built on, you'll understand why you're receiving care in the way that you are.
That's a tricky thing, because we have thousands of people giving birth. We needed a system, in a way, to systemize how we process thousands of people giving birth at a given time.
We can't just imagine just saying, right, well, you know, women will come in any time between 37 weeks and 42, who knows, maybe 43. We're going to use instinct, and we're just, you know, like, just, it would be so chaotic. So these structures are there in place to kind of, you know, make it work, so to speak.
Knowing that they still have a way forward within the system is really important. And,
yes,
you know, you're not just a number in the system, although sometimes you can feel like you are. You know, you're on a conveyor belt and there's a disappointment, and then you've got to do this test and you've got to do this. You know, you can often feel a bit like a number in the system. But, you know, I think it's really important to remember that you are incredibly important as an individual human, and that you're carrying new life. This is sacred. This is sacred ground that you're on as a pregnant woman. And going into the system, it's actually okay for you to ask questions and take up more time and have your needs met. It's really important that women feel heard. And that's something that I, you know, definitely say to my clients is, you know, there's that sense in us that we don't want to ask too many questions, that we'll just trust the process. But the process, if we trust the process and we go with the flow, we end up going with the flow of the system. And so having more knowledge and understanding more what the system is in the way that it's taking the majority of women, And like you mentioned, the cascade of interventions, that's one of the really positive things I've noticed over the 20 years is that women are becoming more educated, more informed. They are looking at the research, they're asking questions. Like, this is a really positive thing that I've seen.
Definitely. I mean, a part of me worries, though, that the more educated you become, the more fearful you become. And we know you can end up following accounts on social media and actually just starting to get really, really scared. And then who knows, you know, they might make a decision out of fear. I'm going to free birth. You know, obviously free birth is right for some women. I did it for Olivia's birth. But I don't ever think it's right to make a decision that is fear-based. It needs to be one that is, you know, is from an empowered place. But it is hard. I think it's becoming harder for pregnant women to navigate pregnancy and childbirth. It's not simple.
It's not. It's not. I think that's a huge challenge in the modern world for pregnant women is that they feel that they need to know everything. And like I said before, you know, I even prepare my clients for let's plan for all scenarios. We can't possibly plan for all scenarios. And that causes overwhelm. And, you know, I think we need to have a level of knowledge and understanding that's really important, but not feel that we need to know everything because that can cause us to feel really, you know, stretched. That's a lot for women to have to navigate, to feel that they need to know everything. We can cover the main bases and we can set them up with just the knowledge that they can ask questions, that they don't need to make decisions that don't feel right for them, that hospital policy is policy. It's not the law. I actually said to a client today on the phone, I said, you're not going to get sent to jail for saying no to a vaginal exam because, you know, that kind of, you do kind of feel like maybe that's what will happen. Like I need to say yes because they're offering something. But the policy is that they need to offer. They have a system and a protocol and procedures that they need to follow. And, you know, like you mentioned before, the 4-hourly vaginal exams, that's hospital policy. That's what they need to offer as part of a duty of care. But I think it's important that women know that being offered doesn't mean that that's the recommendation. It's that's what's being offered. And how do you feel about that?
In Australia, when you're supporting births and mums are declining routine interventions, do you find that it's kind of well received, or is there sometimes kind of this sense that this woman's being what's the word, difficult or anything like that?
I think it really depends on the care provider on the day. You know, I work in, as I mentioned, a lot of hospitals in Perth, and I think it depends. Like there are some incredible midwives that I encounter in the hospitals that are very supportive of the choices that women make and listen to women and you know, offer multiple options actually. And I think that's beautiful, but it's not always the case. And yes, sometimes there is that sense, you know, they might be quite tolerant to the woman, but I see them, you know, having a chat in the hallway and I feel like, you know, there is some resistance to women being educated and informed. And I do sometimes feel that the medical professionals see, you know, they might even see me come in as the doula and you can almost see like a tangible, they may have their back up just a little bit, like what's going to happen here? Is she going to take her client down a path that is, you know, against what we would like to happen? And that's not what I do. That's not what we do as doulas at all. Our role as doulas is emotional support. And so I'm very much there to emotionally support the woman and to, you know, encourage her and help that, you know, those mindset places that women can sometimes get to in labour where they feel they can't keep going or that they're struggling. And so that's, you know, that's our cue as doulas to be like, yes, you can do this, you've got this. And, you know, we work through that together. And I think when midwives see that and see the way that I'm supporting is actually not combative, I'm very much there to support my client in the decisions that they're making and amplifying their voice if that needs to happen. But mostly I'm there as emotional support and I'm not there to, you know, talk my client into making decisions against hospital protocol. That never happens. No. I'm not there for that, are we?
No. Not me either. So looking back, what has being a doula taught you about resilience, both in yourself and in the families, and particularly the woman giving birth?
Oh my goodness. What a great question. Resilience is everything. I see it all the time in women and their partners, and, even in myself, in the way that I support, because I think that as humans, we often get to a place where we think we can't do something, and then that situation presents itself and we do that thing, in lots of areas of our lives. Women are so resilient in birth. I see it all the time. I see them go through transition and say, I can't do this anymore, like, we see at most births. And then they go ahead and do it anyway. And I just think that is the most incredible thing to witness, is the rising up on the inside. And you're right, it's, that mindset is so important. It's that sense of, I can do this, even if it's hard. And I regularly say to clients in the lead up to birth, let's talk about some of the hard things you've been through before. And everyone's been through hard stuff. Like, everyone's had difficult experiences in life, and to draw on those experiences and say, I didn't think I could do it, and then I did it. I didn't think I was going to get through that time in my life, but then I did, and I'm stronger on the other side of it. And so I love using those examples from people's lives because it's personal to them.
I think that pregnancy, childbirth, and motherhood are the most intense kind of character building events you will ever go through, times in your life, I think. And just reframing it as character building can be really positive, because when we've gone through difficult life events, we do grow as people. That doesn't mean we should go and seek those events out, but it does mean that, instead of thinking, oh my gosh, my birth really didn't go to plan, actually, what is it an area of opportunity for you to grow as a person, for you to learn about yourself, for you to learn about how you cope with these scenarios. Could be, a healthy reframe, because I worry sometimes that we do get attached to specific outcome or certain type of birth.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with you. And I think that birth is that entrance into motherhood. And, motherhood there's tough times in motherhood. And
you'd know more than me with 5. We should record a whole nother podcast. I would love to hear about your life with 5 children.
Very busy. But yeah, we go through difficult times as mothers, that newborn phase when you're just meeting that little person for the first time. And, obviously having given birth myself, for 5 children, I would have thought that by my 3rd or my 4th or my 5th child, I would know what I'm doing. But the reality is I didn't. Each child presented new opportunities for growth. And the birth of each of those children and the resilience that it took for me to get through, they're all different, obviously. And I think those unique experiences is what helped me to be a more resilient mother as well. That It's not always easy. And that, the challenges that I faced through pregnancy and the challenges I faced through the births of each of my children, and that, that early postpartum of learning to breastfeed, because breastfeeding's such a natural thing, but it doesn't come naturally to so many of us. I had a huge struggle, and with all of them actually. And by the time I got to my 5th pregnancy, I just booked the lactation expert, and she came in straight away. And, I would have thought, having breastfed, I'd breastfed for 10 years at that point. I thought, I'm going to be fine with breastfeeding, but
wow,
I need support in breastfeeding. And so that was, another mountain to climb post-birth. And, there are always challenges, but as women, I think we are incredibly resilient, and that's part of who we are and what we're made up of. And I see that every time I go to a birth. I see women, meeting their fears head on and rising to new heights in themselves, and then giving birth, and however they give birth, that euphoria for women in that post-birth phase.
What would you say to a woman who's listening to us and she sat there thinking, I am still really anxious about giving birth? What do you want to say to her? And also, what would you recommend her do to help herself get more prepared?
My one piece of advice, I mean, obviously it's very hard to narrow down to one, but let's just narrow down to reducing input from other people, choosing who you listen to. Because if you are feeling anxious about birth and you're feeling unsure and uncertain and you're worrying about all the what ifs, I think sharing that with the wrong people can exacerbate the problem. So I think choosing who you get input from is really important if you're feeling that way. I put out something on Instagram the other day that said, if you're scared of birth, talk to someone who isn't scared. And, you know, that's where a doula is so fantastic. I'm not scared of birth. I respect birth and I know that birth is intense, and I'm definitely not sugarcoating it. It's the most intense thing that I've ever done in my life. But I'm not scared of it. And so come and talk to me, or come and talk to Poppy. Go and talk to a doula. Find accounts that are not terrifying, that are positive birth accounts. That's my top advice.
Lovely. Beautiful. Bonnie, where can people find you, and what kind of services could you offer? Look, we've got lots of listeners in Australia, by the way. So what services do you offer, I guess, both in person, but online as well? There'll be a lot of people who might want some online support.
Yeah, people can find me on Instagram. That's where I'm most active. It's Bonnie the Doula. The services I offer are very niche. I spend most of my time now on Zoom calls with mums all over the world and couples all over the world. I've found that supporting people in person, as much as I absolutely adore that, and I'll never stop doing that, my capacity to support is quite reduced because, you know, even if I support 3 or 4 births a month, it's a huge capacity for me to be available and on call all the time for that many families. Like, that really stretches me. At the moment, I've started reaching more women internationally by being able to chat with them on Zoom.
If anyone wants to come to you, they're worried about birth, they want to talk about fears, just you could talk to them about anything?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah,
Amazing.
Pregnancy, birth itself, preparing for birth, postpartum.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is there like a booking form or something on the website?
Ways to just send me a message on Instagram. That's
Amazing.
Probably the easiest way, and then we can talk that way.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for being with us, Bonnie. This was such a good episode. I loved it. Thank you.
Love talking with you, Poppy, and thank you so much for having me on your show.
Thank you very much.